This happened to my dad when he was a little kid. He never really talks about it much, and honestly, I think it messed him up more than he lets on. Even now, just imagining what he went through gives me chills. He was about 9 years old at the time, and for some reason, he was home alone one evening. He was in the living room, lounging on the couch in front of the only TV in the house. It was one of those old boxy sets, the kind that buzzed faintly when it was on, and took a few seconds to warm up. He was just watching TV like any other kid would, probably cartoons or something harmless, when suddenly the screen flickered and went black. Confused, he got up and walked over to the set, fiddling with the knobs until it turned back on. It wasn't that unusual. Those old TVs could be temperamental. But when he settled back onto the couch, it happened again. Snap! Off went the TV. Now he was a little annoyed. He got up again, turned the TV back on, and returned to the couch. But almost immediately, click, it turned off once more. No noise, no warning, just dead silence and a black screen. This went on a few more times. Turn it on, sit down, it shuts off. Each time a little faster than the last, a little too precise. That's when he started to get suspicious. Maybe it was the remote, he thought. Maybe it had gotten stuck or was buried somewhere, sending signals by accident. So he started searching for it. He lifted cushions, checked under the table, and finally walked around the room toward the corner behind the larger couch. And that's when he saw him. Crouched low in the corner, half shadowed by the furniture, was a man, a complete stranger. He was clutching the remote in one hand, his remote, and staring straight at my dad. His hair was long, tangled and unwashed, draped over his face like a curtain. But through the strands, his eyes were wide, wild, almost gleeful, like he was enjoying it. And then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile, not a friendly one. It was the kind of smile that feels wrong just to look at, stretched too wide and too still, like it didn't quite fit his face. My dad didn't wait to find out anything else. He turned and bolted, out the living room, through the front door, and down the porch steps, screaming at the top of his lungs. He ran straight to the neighbor's house, barefoot, still shaking. When they opened the door, he could barely get the words out, but they called the police immediately. And the man? He was still there when the officers arrived, just sitting in the living room, like he belonged there, holding the remote. He didn't fight, didn't even run. They arrested him on the spot. No one ever really figured out who he was or why he was in the house. My dad has always assumed he was either homeless or deeply disturbed, maybe both. He doesn't like to talk about it much beyond that. But every time I remember this story, I think about how easily it could have gone worse, how close that man was, how long he had been hiding there, and how he smiled. My friend once told me about something that happened to her when she was little, something that still sends a chill down her spine whenever she talks about it. She must have been around 8 or 9 years old at the time. It was an ordinary afternoon, and she was walking home from school like she always did. The route was familiar, almost automatic. Her small backpack bounced lightly on her shoulders, and the streets were quiet, just the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. She lived alone with her mom, who worked full-time and usually didn't get home until later in the evening. Most days, she'd let herself into the house, fix a snack, and do her homework while waiting. That day seemed no different, until it wasn't. She climbed up the front steps and reached into her pocket to get the house key, already halfway extending her arm to slide it into the lock. Just as the tip of the key touched the door, it swung open. Standing there was her mother. But something felt off. Her mom wasn't supposed to be home, and instead of her usual work attire, she was wearing a dressing gown, looking pale and drained. She had apparently come home early, sick. But it wasn't the robe or her unexpected presence that froze the moment. It was the look on her mom's face. Her eyes weren't on her daughter at all. They were locked onto something or someone just beyond her. And then her mom said, sharply and with alarm, "Who are you?" Confused, my friend turned around. And that's when she saw him. A man, tall, hunched slightly, and wrapped in a long, dark coat. His features were shadowed, but he moved quickly, without a word, spinning on his heel and hurrying back down the path. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, fading into the quiet street like he'd never been there at all. Neither of them had noticed him before. Neither had heard footsteps or the creak of gravel on the path. But he had been right there, right behind her, close enough to follow her into the house, close enough to... They never found out who he was or what he wanted. He vanished before the police could be called, and no one nearby reported seeing him again. But the thought lingers. That day, her mom had felt too sick to stay at work, too sick to push through the shift like she usually did. And because of that, because of something as random and inconvenient as illness, she had come home early. And maybe, just maybe, that simple twist of fate stopped something terrible from happening. Some things you never forget. Some chills never really leave. And sometimes it's the quietest moments, the ones that almost go unnoticed, that end up saving a life. Before I go on, there's something you need to understand. Jacob's mum was a drug addict. She had been for a long time. His dad? Mostly a decent guy, really. The only thing anyone could ever hold against him was that he stayed with her for far too long. One night, while Jacob and his father were asleep, a strange series of noises shattered the silence. Bang, scratch, drag. The sounds echoed through the house, coming from the direction of the mother's room. Jacob's dad jolted awake. Without hesitation, he bolted out of bed and sprinted down the hallway. He began pounding on the bedroom door, his fists thudding hard and fast. The door suddenly creaked open. There stood Jacob's mother, eyes half-lidded, voice groggy and irritated. "What the hell are you doing? You woke me up!" She looked past him in confusion, as if she had no clue what he was talking about. He asked about the noise, about the banging, the dragging, but she'd been asleep, claimed she hadn't heard anything at all. Jacob's dad might have chalked it up to her being high again, but something wasn't right, not this time. The window in her room was wide open, letting in the cold night air. And the TV? It had been dragged across the floor, still plugged in, but now pressed against the far wall with its screen turned completely outward, facing the window. That chilled him more than anything. Without saying much more, he closed the window, locked it tight, then walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. This time, he locked it from the outside. He told her to sleep in the living room. Then he stayed up for the rest of the night, sitting in near darkness, holding on to a baseball bat like it was the only thing keeping the house from falling apart. A little before 5 a.m., he gently shook Jacob awake. It was still pitch black outside. Jacob wandered into the kitchen, still wiping sleep from his eyes.
His mother was already in there, muttering to herself, staring into her coffee cup like it held all the answers. A few minutes later, Jacob's dad walked in. His eyes were wide, alert, like he hadn't blinked in hours. He looked at Jacob, then at his mom, and slowly he raised a finger to his lips. Shh! Jacob and his mother went completely still. That's when they heard it, shuffling from above.
Something was moving on the roof, its weight shifting from one side to the other, heavy and deliberate, back and forth, slow and dragging, pacing, listening. Jacob's dad tightened his grip on the bat. They sat in silence, every creak and groan of the house amplified by fear. Minutes passed. The shuffling eventually faded, but the dread remained, thick and suffocating. Without saying another word, Jacob's dad picked up the phone and called Jacob's grandmother. He asked if they could come stay at her place for a few days. She said yes right away and told them she'd drive over to pick them up. While they waited, Jacob sat on the couch in the front room. There wasn't a TV in there, nothing to distract him, just quiet, stillness. His eyes drifted toward the hallway, to the empty room. The door stood open just slightly. Nothing unusual about it, at first. But then, Jacob's breath caught in his throat. There, curling slowly around the edge of the doorframe, was a finger. It didn't look human. It was far too long, thick and bulbous, like those foam fingers you see at sports games, except this one was real. The skin was pale and rubbery. The nail was dark, cracked, and dirty. It didn't belong, not to any person, not to anything he could recognize. It was just there, flexing slowly, wrapped around the doorframe, even though the door latch was on the opposite side. Jacob screamed, loud and sudden. His father didn't hesitate. He grabbed Jacob and ran. His mother followed, wide-eyed and stumbling behind them. They didn't stop running until they reached a nearby gas station, where they sat in front under the flickering lights of the canopy. They waited there in silence, barely speaking, until Jacob's grandmother pulled up in her old truck. Jacob tried to describe the finger later. He said it didn't just look wrong, it looked wrong in a way his brain didn't know how to fix. Too long, too wide, too smooth, but not clean, like it had been soaking in something. Once they packed up their things and got out of that house, they never really went back. Not for birthdays, not for memories, not even to say goodbye. Nothing was stolen, nothing was missing, except in that empty room, the window was open.
I was 13 years old at the time, and I had what was probably the most isolated bedroom imaginable. It was on its own floor, completely separate from the rest of the house, tucked away from my parents' room like an afterthought. That kind of setup might sound cool to some kids, but not to me, not with my imagination. My mind was always racing, especially at night. Every creak in the walls or whisper of wind outside turned into something sinister in my head. I'd lie awake for hours, paralyzed by thoughts I couldn't explain, scared for reasons I couldn't name. It was a seemingly ordinary night, A little rain was falling outside, soft and steady, but nothing close to a storm. I remember waking up and looking over at the glowing red digits on my clock. It was just past 3 a.m. That's when I felt it. This tight, uncomfortable feeling in my chest, like something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I glanced toward the foot of my bed, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. Something round, hunched, just peeking above the headboard near the edge. My heart leapt. But a second later, I exhaled. I remembered. I sometimes hung my hat on the tall wooden post at the foot of the bed. The shadow matched its shape. Just my stupid hat. Relieved, I let myself fall back into the sheets and drifted off again. But it didn't last. About 30 minutes later, I stirred again. My eyes flew back to the same spot. That same shape looming. Another jolt of fear. And again, another realization. It's the hat. Same shadow. Nothing had changed. I rolled over, annoyed with myself, and went back to sleep. Then, for a third time, I woke up. Maybe another half hour later. And, like clockwork, my eyes darted to the foot of the bed. The shadow was still there. Same shape, same position. But this time, something felt off. My throat was dry. I reached one hand lazily over the edge of the bed, groping for my water bottle. But instead of cool plastic, my fingers brushed against something soft. Fabric. I gripped it and brought it up into the light. It was my hat. My hat in my hand. I froze. If the hat was here, then what was that there? My chest tightened. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand shook as I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand, panic rising like a tidal wave. I flicked the switch, and the room lit up. There was a man. His face was just barely peeking over the edge of the bed, eyes wide, locked onto mine. His expression was flat, empty, like he had been watching me for hours. My lungs failed me. The scream that tore out of my throat was impossibly high-pitched, like it didn't even belong to me. I scrambled backward, practically launching myself off the mattress. The man reached for me. I felt his hand swipe past my arm as I bolted through the door and down the stairs. I didn't look back. I crashed into my parents' room, screaming, gasping, shaking. My dad didn't hesitate. He reached beneath the bed and grabbed the baton he kept hidden there. With nothing but adrenaline and fury, he ran up the stairs to my room. But it was already too late. When we burst in, the room was empty, quiet, only the lamp still glowing. The window was wide open, and outside, the rain was still falling, soft, steady, and cold. Apparently, the man had jumped right out the window onto the patio roof just below. We called the police, of course, but no one was ever found. They searched the neighborhood, they took prints. Nothing came of it. And no one ever figured out how he got in. But I'll never forget that feeling. That something was wrong, even before I knew why.
When I was a kid, I was lucky enough to grow up with a huge group of friends. Almost all of them lived right on my block. Weekend nights were something special. Once the sun dipped below the rooftops and the porch lights flickered on, we'd all gather outside to play our favorite game, Manhunt. Basically hide and seek for older kids who thought they were too cool for regular rules. It was perfect.
Since we were all neighbors, we turned the entire block into our playground. That meant front yards, backyards, and even the narrow stretch of woods behind our houses were fair game. But we did have one rule: no going deeper than one backyard's length into the woods. Not because we were scared necessarily, but because it got too dark, too easy to get turned around. The trees were dense back there, and once you went too far in, the houses disappeared completely behind you. Still, I had my favorite hiding spot. Behind an old, rusted barrel someone had dumped there years ago. It was hidden just enough in the brush, and for whatever reason, no one ever thought to look there. I used it every time. It was my spot. On this particular night, there were only 6 of us playing. My friends Joe and Raj were on my team. We were chosen to hide first, so the 3 of us quickly scattered, splitting off into our usual directions. I went straight for the barrel, cut through my backyard, ducked under the half-broken fence, and made my way into the trees. The woods swallowed the sounds of the neighborhood fast. It was quiet, still. The only noise was the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional flicker of movement from fireflies. Usually, within a few minutes, I'd see flashlights bouncing through the trees, searching for hiding spots, voices calling softly to one another. But not this time. It stayed quiet. Too quiet. Then I finally heard it. Footsteps. Dry leaves crunching softly underfoot, approaching slowly. I couldn't see a flashlight, which made me think it had to be one of my teammates sneaking closer. So I whispered, just loud enough, "Joe? Raj?" No answer. Just the sound of footsteps growing faster. And then, without warning, sprinting, full speed. Whoever it was came crashing toward me through the brush, charging straight at the barrel like they knew exactly where I was hiding. I didn't think. I didn't stop to ask questions. I shot up from behind the barrel and ran. My legs moved before I even realized it, crashing through branches, leaves whipping across my face. I sprinted back into my backyard, heart hammering, lungs on fire. But when I looked back, no one followed. No flashlight, no footsteps, nothing. I caught my breath and looked around, hoping to spot Joe or Raj, maybe laughing, thinking it was one of them messing with me. But the backyard was empty. Then I heard voices calling my name from out front. "Hey, where are you? Come on, we're all out here." That's when I knew something was wrong. I made my way to the front of the house and saw a small crowd gathered, my friends, Joe's parents, and mine all standing together under the porch light. Everyone turned as I approached, their faces softened with relief. My mom pulled me into a hug before I could even ask what was going on. Apparently, just a few minutes before, a police cruiser had slowly rolled through the neighborhood. The officer inside stopped, rolled down the window, and gave a grim warning. A serial rapist had been spotted in the area. All kids were to go inside immediately. That's when panic spread. Parents began calling their kids. Joe's mom went running through yards. My parents had just started shouting my name when I came out from the side of the house. Naturally, I was confused until I told them what had just happened to me, about the footsteps, the whispering, the sprinting, and that I had run because someone, not one of my friends, was coming right at me in the dark. Their faces changed instantly. My dad's jaw clenched. My mom went pale. They asked me again and again, making absolutely sure I wasn't exaggerating or imagining it. Then they called the police. I never found out if he was caught. The cops drove around, asked questions, searched the woods, but there wasn't much to go on. No one saw a face.
No one saw which way he went. I try not to think about it too much, but sometimes, late at night, the thought creeps back in. What if I hadn't run? What if I had waited behind the barrel just a few seconds longer? What if that shadow in the woods wasn't just passing through? And worst of all, what if he knew I always hid there?
I must have been around 12 or 13 when this happened. It was just a quiet weekend getaway. Me, my mom, my stepdad, and our 2 dogs headed to the beach to relax. We'd rented an apartment tucked way in the back of the shorefront, kind of removed from the busier parts of town. At first glance, the place seemed totally normal. Plain walls, cheap furniture, nothing memorable or strange about it. After we unpacked our bags, we headed out for dinner, just the 3 of us and the dogs. The sky was already starting to dim by the time we came back, probably around 9 p.m. We watched a little TV, lounged around for a bit. The apartment only had 1 bedroom, so my mom and stepdad took the pull-out couch in the living room. The dogs curled up on the blanket next to them. They gave me the master bedroom, king-sized bed and all. I remember thinking I'd hit the jackpot. When I got to bed, I pulled out my laptop and started playing some games I had installed before the trip. I knew there'd be no Wi-Fi, so I made sure to bring something to keep me entertained. I played for a while. The apartment was quiet, nothing strange, just the wind outside and the hum of the fridge in the kitchenette. Eventually, I decided to call it a night. I closed the lid of my laptop, set it on the nightstand, and crawled under the blanket. I lay there, listening to the silence creep in. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. The kind that presses on you. A heavy, still quiet. Maybe 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. I was just starting to drift off when it happened. A sigh. Loud, sudden, and way too close. It wasn't the gentle kind of sigh you hear when someone's shifting in their sleep. It was a forceful exhale, like someone had been standing right at the foot of the bed, watching me, and finally let go of a breath they'd been holding for a long, long time. My body froze. I stared into the dark, heart pounding so loud I could hear it. It wasn't my parents. There was no way. The bedroom door had been closed tight, and the dogs were out there with them. This sound came from inside the room. I didn't even think. I threw the blanket off, bolted upright, and grabbed the doorknob like my life depended on it. I didn't stop to look, didn't try to rationalize. I just ran, straight across the hall to the spare room opposite the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I didn't sleep. Not a second. I just sat on the edge of the spare bed, curled up with my knees to my chest, eyes darting to every shadow and corner. Every creak of the building sent a jolt through me. My skin felt like it was buzzing. The next morning, when the sun finally started to rise, I went back into the living room, eyes heavy, still shaken. I told my mom and stepdad everything, how I heard it, how close it sounded. They brushed it off, said I was probably just tired or dreaming, that maybe I heard one of them from the other room, maybe the pipes, maybe nothing. But I knew better. I know what I heard. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't the dogs, and it wasn't coming from the other room. It was right there, right next to me, in the dark.
This story still gives me nightmares. Actual, wake up in a cold sweat nightmares. It happened a few years ago when I was staying with one of my best friends, Mike, in North Carolina. I had a job interview in the area and was coming down from New Jersey. Mike offered to let me crash at his place for a few days. He didn't live super close to the company, about 2 hours away, but honestly, I didn't care. It was a chance to catch up with one of my closest friends. The weird part? It didn't even start as a horror story. Not at all. After my second interview, I came back to Mike's place in a great mood. I'd been offered the job on the spot. We were ecstatic. That night, we threw a little celebration in his backyard. Just a few beers, a few friends, and some loud music. Well, more than a few beers. People were coming and going all night. That's just how Mike's house was. He never really kept track of who walked in or out. The doors were unlocked most of the time. No one questioned it. Around 3 a.m., after most people had left and the fire pit burned down to glowing embers, we called it a night. I was wasted, barely able to walk straight. I stumbled my way upstairs, dragging my feet like I had bricks strapped to them. I made it to the bathroom, barely managing to lock the door behind me. I stood there, swaying slightly, hands on the sink, splashing hot water onto my face, trying to pull myself together. And that's when I felt it. A presence. Something in the corner of my vision. Movement just outside the bathroom door. I looked up. The door was cracked open just slightly, and there was an eye staring through the gap. Just one eye, unblinking, locked directly onto me. I gasped, "Holy shit!" and immediately lost my footing, collapsing onto the bathroom floor with a drunken thud. By the time I scrambled back to my feet, heart pounding, the eye was gone. Just an empty hallway. No footsteps, no sound. I staggered out of the bathroom, clutching the doorway for balance, and called for Mike. He answered from the kitchen downstairs. I could hear the clinking of a glass. It couldn't have been him. He hadn't come upstairs. I would have heard it. But I still asked, my voice shaking, "Were you just up here?" He yelled back, "What? No, man, why?" I can't remember if I chalked it up to the alcohol or if I just didn't want to deal with it, but I pushed the thought down, swallowed my fear, and dragged myself into the guest room. I collapsed into the bed, didn't even bother getting under the covers properly, just threw the blanket over myself like a shield and passed out. The kind of sleep only drunken exhaustion can bring. Instant, dreamless, and heavy. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up to a splitting headache. My skull felt like it was cracking open. The room was cold. My mouth was dry. I blinked at the faint light starting to creep through the curtains. And then I realized something. My foot, bare, was hanging over the edge of the bed, and something was touching it. Not brushing it, not nudging it, grasping it. Cold fingers, thin, deliberate, stroking my foot. Before I could even react, a voice rasped from the darkness. "Can you help me?" It was the kind of whisper you feel in your spine, dry, unnatural, so close it felt like it came from right under the bed. I bolted upright, lungs locked, and screamed louder than I ever have in my life. I didn't stop to think. I didn't look. I just ran. Out the room, down the hall, nearly crashing into Mike at the top of the stairs. "What the hell's going on?" he shouted, still half asleep. I could barely form words. "There's someone in that room." Mike grabbed his phone. We called the cops right away. When they arrived, we stood outside in the driveway, watching them sweep the house. I remember the way one officer's radio crackled when he called for backup. I remember the way Mike kept repeating, "How the hell did she even get in?" Because they found her. A woman, late 40s, strung out, pale, wearing a dirty hoodie and tattered jeans. She'd been hiding in a closet. The eye I saw through the bathroom door, that was hers. She admitted she'd just walked into Mike's house. No plan, no reason, just wandered in during the chaos of the party and never left.
That night, while we were laughing and drinking out back, she was inside, watching, waiting. The police said she was clearly under the influence of something and likely had mental health issues, but that didn't make it feel any less real, any less terrifying. To this day, I never sleep with my feet outside the blanket, ever, ever. Because now I know, sometimes it's not just a nightmare. Sometimes there really is someone under the bed.
It was the dead of winter. My buddies, C, a couple of the guys, and me had taken a ski trip up to South Lake Tahoe. We were lucky enough to score this massive, luxurious log cabin tucked deep into the woods, surrounded by snow-covered trees and silence so thick you could hear your own breathing. We were supposed to be there for a few nights, just unwind, hit the slopes, drink too much, and disconnect for a while. On the third night, a brutal blizzard rolled in, the kind that makes the world outside feel like it's unraveling in slow motion. By midnight, the cabin felt like it was floating in the middle of a frozen void. Sometime late that night, must have been around 2 or 3 a.m., I got up to grab a glass of water. Everyone else was passed out upstairs. The fire had died down, and only the faint hum of the heater filled the empty spaces. I crossed the open living room toward the kitchen, half asleep, when suddenly, a knock. Frantic, sharp, echoing through the wood. I froze. It wasn't just a knock. It was urgent, desperate, the kind of knock you hear in movies right before something terrible happens. I stopped in my tracks, heart already thudding. Who would be out here at this hour, in this weather? For a second, I considered ignoring it, pretending we were asleep and letting them walk away. But then I remembered, our car was parked right out front, headlights still dusted with snow. Anyone standing outside could clearly tell someone was in. And what if they were in trouble? Stranded? Lost? Freezing? I tiptoed toward the door, my footsteps barely creaking across the wooden floor. I waited, listening. Then it came again, louder, more panicked. Bam, 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 bam! I swallowed hard. "Who is it?" I called out. Nothing. No voice. Just the wind screaming outside. I asked again, louder this time. Still, no response. Then, silence. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I stood there for a moment, the silence pressing against my ears, trying to decide what to do. Curiosity got the better of me. I slid the chain lock into place and cracked the door open, cold air rushing in like a wave. No one. The porch was empty. Snow still falling in thick, heavy flakes, dancing under the porch light. But there, clear as day, were footprints, leading away from the cabin, faint but visible, already filling with snow. My chest tightened. I should have closed the door. I should have let it go. But something about it, some strange, irrational pull, kept me rooted. Maybe it was guilt, or pity, or just the haunting image of someone freezing to death a few yards away while I stood warm inside. So I grabbed my boots, pulled on my coat, stepped out into the storm. The snow stung against my face like tiny needles. The wind howled between the trees, and the cabin lights behind me dimmed quickly as I followed the prints across the yard. They led me to the edge of the property, and then they stopped. Just like that. One step, another, gone. No more footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of a struggle, no dragging,
No skipping. Just a blank stretch of snow, untouched in every direction. Like someone had just been standing there and then vanished. I stood there for a second, breath steaming in the cold, my entire body screaming that something was wrong, deeply wrong. I turned and ran, back to the cabin, boots slipping on the icy path, lungs burning. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked every bolt, chain, and latch we had. I leaned against the door, trying to calm my breathing. That's when it started again. The knocking. Furious this time. Relentless. Bam, 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 bam. My heart jumped into my throat. I screamed for my friends. Kim, Mike, Ryan, get up! They all came crashing down the stairs one by one, eyes wide and groggy. What's going on? I told them everything. The knocking, the footprints, how they just ended. We opened the door together, stepped onto the porch as a group, and again, no one. The snow outside was smooth, perfect. The prints I had followed, already filled, like they'd never been there at all. I never convinced my friends that night. They tried to reason it away. Maybe I drank too much? Maybe the snow played tricks on my eyes. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know something was out there. Still don't know what it was. Still don't want to. But I'll tell you this. I don't open the door during storms anymore. Ever. My friend and I were heading to a party a few hours out of town, so we made plans to stay the night at her family's holiday house, this quiet little place about an hour south of the venue. It seemed like the perfect setup. Avoid the late-night drive, have a place to crash, keep things easy. We arrived mid-afternoon. It was the dead of winter in a vacation town, and the whole area felt empty. No other cars on the street, no lights in the neighboring houses. It was one of those places that only came alive in the summer. Off-season, it was practically a ghost town. When it came time to leave for the party, we walked out to the front gate. I hesitated. The gate had given me trouble earlier. It had stuck, stiff and awkward on its hinges. But I also didn't like the idea of leaving it open while we were gone. If someone was lurking around, unlikely but possible, an open gate would make it all too easy. So after a moment's debate, I shut it tight, pulled the latch down until it clicked. Locked, secure, done. The party was great. Laughs, drinks, good music. We didn't think about the house at all while we were out. Hours passed in a blur. By the time we rolled back into the driveway, it was close to midnight. That's when I saw it. The gate, wide open. And I knew I had shut it. This wasn't the kind of latch that could come loose in the wind. It wasn't a windy night anyway. Something, or someone, had opened it. My stomach twisted, but I didn't want to panic my friend. When she asked if I had closed it before we left, I just gave a vague, "I think so." No need to freak out yet. Maybe it was nothing.
Inside, we tried to relax, made a snack. The house was gold and unusually silent. My nerves still buzzed, but I tried to act normal, moving through the house as if everything was fine. And then, it wasn't. My friend came racing out of the kitchen and crashed into me in the hallway, nearly knocking both of us over. "I heard someone," she gasped, breathless, "outside, walking around." The blood drained from my face. We sat together in the hallway, backs pressed to the wall, too scared to even peek through the windows. There was no cell reception, none. No signal bars, no Wi-Fi. just us and this creeping, primal fear. The next 30 minutes crawled by in silence, broken only by the sounds we couldn't explain. Crunching footsteps, a brief rattle at the back door like someone trying to force it open. Then, silence again. It wasn't in our heads. We both heard it. We both knew something or someone was outside. We had no weapons, no service, no one around for miles. That's when we decided we had to get out. As quietly as we could, we scrambled around the house, grabbing whatever we could find. Bags, jackets, keys. We didn't even bother packing properly, just threw everything into our arms and bolted for the front door. But just as we reached the threshold, ready to throw it open and run, bang! A huge, bone-rattling sound echoed from the backyard like something heavy had fallen or been thrown. And then came the sound that haunts me even now. Hundreds of birds screaming. It was like the trees themselves had exploded with noise, wings beating wildly in the night, a shrill, chaotic chorus of panic. We sprinted to the car, keys shaking in hand, stuff still clutched in our arms. We didn't even make it to the back seat, just threw everything into our laps, slammed the doors shut, and fired the engine. As we reversed out of the driveway, headlights sweeping across the side of the house, there he was, someone running toward us, a figure, dark, fast, rounding the corner of the house, moving straight for the car. We didn't wait to see who it was. We sped off, tires skidding over the gravel, hearts pounding, breath sharp in our lungs. We drove the entire way home without saying a word, too afraid to look back, too afraid to stop. We didn't sleep that night. We didn't even try. And to this day, we never figured out who that person was or what they wanted. But one thing's for sure, I always trust my gut now, and I never, ever leave a gate half closed.
When I was 10 years old and my youngest brother Ben had just turned 1, my parents decided to repaint our bedrooms over a weekend. That meant we couldn't sleep upstairs for a few nights. The only option? The basement. It wasn't a finished, cozy kind of basement. It was cold, dimly lit, with that dry, slightly metallic smell that seems to seep from the concrete walls themselves. There was a pull-out couch we used as a bed, and Ben had an extra crib set up down there, tucked near the wall just outside the doorway of the old boiler room. Even at 10, I hated it. Sleeping in that underground pit made my skin crawl. The air always felt heavier down there, like it pushed down on your chest just a little harder. But for some reason, having Ben with me, just his presence made it feel a little safer. He'd wake up crying sometimes, and I'd stumble out of bed to check on him. Tending to him in the middle of the night gave me something to do, something to focus on other than my own fear. But there was this one night I've never forgotten. The night that changed everything. It started like the others. Lights off, the soft creak of the house settling above us, the hum of the heater. I was curled under the blanket on the pullout, drifting in and out of sleep. Then, a scream. Not a whimper, not a cry. A blood-curdling scream that ripped through the silence like glass shattering. It came from Ben. I bolted upright, heart instantly pounding. That wasn't normal. That wasn't baby noise. It was raw panic. I jumped off the bed and ran to his crib. He was standing up, clutching the side with tiny fists, face pale and soaked in tears. His mouth was open, mid-scream, but he wasn't looking at me. He was pointing, straight past me, into the pitch-black boiler room.
My body went ice cold. It wasn't just fear, it was that primal kind of fear, the kind that hits deep in your bones, where your instincts scream something is wrong before your brain even catches up. I turned, slowly, following the direction of his trembling finger. There was nothing but darkness. The boiler room door was open, just slightly, enough to see blackness beyond it. That door had always made me uncomfortable. It creaked when it opened, smelled like rust and oil. I never liked to look into it, even during the day. And then, in the silence, I heard it. A soft thud. Something had fallen over inside. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. The weight of a presence. That sickening sensation you get when you know you're being watched. The back of my neck went tight. My legs locked for a moment. Ben was still pointing, still screaming, his tiny body trembling. I didn't think. I didn't want to think. I scooped him up into my arms, held him close to my chest, and ran. Ran straight up the stairs, 2 at a time. Didn't look back. Didn't stop to close the door. Didn't breathe until I reached the kitchen light. I remember standing there, clutching Ben as he sobbed against my shoulder, my heart pounding in my ears, my knees shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor. I never told my parents exactly what happened, just said Ben was scared, that I didn't want to sleep down there anymore. They didn't argue, and I never went back down into that basement. Not alone, not at night, not ever. Sometimes I wonder what was in that boiler room, what Ben saw that I couldn't, what was watching us in the dark. And sometimes I don't wonder at all, because deep down, I already know.